So welcome to this series of adventures that will take the direction of opening beyond just stuff. And this really comes out of a curiosity of mine that goes back to when I was in grade school and continues to be something that intrigues me deeply about practice. And even more so about experience. So when I was a kid, I would love to read these science books. There was even there was this store called the Learning Smith, and there's where I discovered all these books about Richard Feynman and Stephen Hawking and hyperspace. And I remember the feeling I would have as I read these books. And sometimes you just kind of set them down and look around and be like, whoa. I think the catchphrase is even, reality is not what you think it is. And probably as many of us are also familiar, that feeling that we can have as we contemplate things like quantum physics or relativity, basically anything after all that mundane, dry Newtonian stuff that sucked all the life out of it. Anyway, we'll come to that later. But whether we encountered it when we were children or later on in life, it does tend to spark this awe, this sense of wonder, and this sense of, especially with the authority of science. And this will be something we'll play with too, because, right, like, okay, so I was a history of science major in college, and there's just so many interesting things about how science works and how it's used in society. And so probably many of us here are also familiar with some of the ways that modern physics has been used in a whole variety of ways in spirituality, in maybe what we would classify as more new age aspects, and maybe even reaching into self-help. And for this first adventure, before getting into what the authority of science is and why we might feel like we can get permission for mystery from science and any of that, to let ourselves discover, even for ourselves, how we are carrying around assumptions, concepts, what we'll just call maps of perception, maps of understanding that are how we navigate life how we experience what we experience. Because one of the things that we can begin to play with and come to see almost kind of like apart from the whole science question, which will be fun to dive into the different aspects of how we can use it, is that something that shakes up and loosens up helps us open beyond our assumptions, our habitual, typical mapping, so that we can actually more fully perceive just what is sensorily there in our experience. That was kind of turned out to be a mouthful, but the gist is not having to go on anyone else's say-so, but just seeing if we can just loosen up some of our assumptions on our maps and open more to what our senses and our perceptions, our own perceptions, our own experience can tell us. And for this, we'll probably use two tricks to do this. And one is what artists use. And there's a wonderful book and program called Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain. And sometimes I like to think of this as a practice of meditating from the right side of the brain. Not that we have to get into the neuroscience of the hemispheres of the brain and approximation that is all built into that. But the basic gist is, even if you just look at your hand, and how we have this word, this label, hand. And I mean, this is what a hand is supposed to look like, right? It's got a center and it's got 5 very clear. And for those who are seeing on video, if you do like a super foreshortened hand, that hardly looks like a hand at all. And so what is the shift that artists who are, using their perceptions to then translate what they see, the lines, the spaces, into a 2D representation on paper, if it's that kind of artwork that you're doing, that mental map of the hand as this, starfish-like 5-finger cartoon can actually get in the way of seeing what you see. And so there's tricks that artists use to let themselves more just see what they see without the labels and without that mapping assumption. And then we'll also use, it was not a technique, but it was a way that Richard Feynman would play and discover things in his own experience. Richard Feynman was a famous particle physicist. And I'll just let that be part of the guided practice as we go into it. And so if we come away from this with just even a sense of how we are filtering through some maps that we can get stuck on, and that sense of being able to open beyond that basically a sense of opening to the unknown. This is what the Richard Feynman playfulness will bring in. But where that unknown is itself our own sensory, immediate experience, just experienced more directly. And from there we can see maybe we can begin to relate to our body less as like just this object of stuff, and maybe have a little more awe, a little more feeling, and a sense of being able to appreciate, acknowledge, and feel what is there, less blocking it out prematurely because of our own assumptions. So we'll go into the first 30 minutes of practice with a little bit more variation, and then continue in the second 30 minutes on this adventure of opening into the unknown. That is opening into more fully our own experience, even our own sensory experience, so that we get to start from that base. As in future sessions, we dive more into what other maps do or don't do for us, discovering this in the immediacy of our own experience here first. And so can settle in, however it's comfortable for you. And recommend for this one probably letting your eyes closed. This will be sensing on the inside. And beginning as a typical meditation might begin, to feel the movement of the breath flowing through your inner landscape. And just notice what this is like, and what you feel. Since the exploration here is less about it needing to be one way or another way, and seeing the variety of ways we can be. Especially if you meditate a lot, there can be a sense of the familiar in the posture, in the breathing. And probably in some kind of a meditation attitude of what it is you're doing here. And invite you to play this game that physicist Richard Feynman would play. So now you're no longer someone who's just joined a meditation session, meditating once again your body in once again this familiar situation. Believe it or not, and you don't have to believe it, you're actually an alien from outer space. And you've been beamed into human form. And you have just a short while to discover all you can about what it's like to be a human being in this form on this planet, only through your own experience. You know nothing. You have no preconceptions. You have no map of what this experience is supposed to be like. You have your old maps of being a alien, but nothing here that would let you know, that would override your felt immediate experience. So just chuck out anything that gives you a visual of what the human form is like. You don't have it anymore. And instead, from the inside, feel, what is this human form? Reconstruct. I should just say construct. There's no reconstruct. Just construct from the sensations. And if you want to make a little bit of movement just to confirm that that is part of your human form, you can do that. And let yourself build up an image from that felt sense of the presence of your body. And for this, it even can help to have a bit of childlike wonder at the experience. What would it be like if you were beamed into something you've never experienced before and could just soak it in without any preconception? Can move. Wow, what is that you can move? There's something you can kind of move without moving, where you allow something to come a little more clearly into a feeling. An area of this form can come a little more clearly. And then you can move that, whatever it is. That is not really a movement that seems external, but like an inner kind of movement. And feel another area of your form a little more clearly. Can move that something that's not really a thing and doesn't really seem to move all through your form. So you kind of feel like the edges of your form have been covered. A friend back home asked you to draw what you felt was a human form. You could kind of sketch it out somehow. And then noticing that it seems like some of these edges of your form have a different kind of sensation. Like the lowest part of your human form seems to be experiencing something. What is it experiencing? And just let it be a felt sense of the answer rather than bringing in any knowledge that you don't actually have. As E.T. the alien here. Noticing how that sense of a different kind of sensation can be felt more clearly at the lower parts, the lowest part actually of your body. But then actually there's other parts of your body that also seem to be experiencing something similar. Maybe it's not just unique to the lowest part, but I could maybe feel it. There's these kinds of long stretches, upper appendages, and they're resting. And there's a similar sensation there as the body resting on this planet. With a open fascination of what it feels like to not only have a form, but it seems to be in some kind of interaction. Has a sensation of kind of substantiality and heft and contact. And probably there's nothing harder than letting go of our old routine assumptions. So just noticing if the sense of awe and openness and possibility have begun to fade. It's almost like it takes effort to maintain. Doesn't always have to be this way, but it can definitely feel like it. And we're kind of imagining here maybe a kind of goofy scenario. But noticing too that it can just be in the next instant that we drop our sense of preconceptions and feel again we've been beamed into this body and we don't know. We have no memories. We have no labels. There's only what we sense and what we experience. Which makes it kind of interesting to do a guided practice this way because we gotta use something to talk about it. But if you can get into the groove of this, it'll be more than anything I could point towards. But it is so interesting, like there's this ongoing movement of something that is coming inside And then there's a movement, and it seems to then leave this body form. And if you knew nothing about this, what would be your feel of it? If you had nothing but curiosity for discovery of what you could find out about the felt experience of what this is like for just these few minutes that you have this human body, where everything in you is just geared towards being open to what you might encounter. What's the experience of this movement like? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What's the consistency of that substance coming in and out? You find any shape or structure within it, or is it all just smooth? With openness to the entirety of the experience, because you don't even know where its effects might end. Feeling into all of experience for any effects that feel at all connected with this movement, something in and out of you. And isn't it interesting that it doesn't seem to need your direction? You can direct it if you want, but unlike other kinds of movements you might make, this movement tends to keep on going whether you intend for it to or not. And letting that sense of exchange between what's inside your human form and what's around you kind of pique your interest in a sense of feeling what is around you. What's the felt experience when you're opening into the unknown of what's around you and just feel what you feel? There's this all around you. There's this in and out of you. There's the inside of you. And opening to how those feel without any particular assumptions about how they should feel. How different do they feel? How similar? When there's not a kind of cartoonish conceptual divide, what does our sensory experience itself tell us? And we'll bring this inquiry more specifically to our hands and our fingers. And I'm going to have to drop the appendages language and, and take up a little more of that sense of being an internal artist. Or even if I say things like thumbs or fingers, you have that sense of to actually feel what you feel and in a playful way internally draw what you see in your mind's eye, what is felt rather than what is thought. That even if I say labels, it just directs you with that sense of opening to the sensory input that you usually associate with that. And for this, might be helpful to have the hands flipped open face. So that the fingers can each be felt surrounded by the air and space around them. And going to internally draw the thumb from the raw sensory input of what you feel, what lets you know you have this thing called a thumb. And returning to that inquiry about feeling what's around your thumb. Feeling what's inside it, the volume of your thumb. Feeling where it is that the inside feeling gives way to the outside feeling. The contour of your thumb in 3D space. And that inquiry again about what feels different between inside and outside. What's the contrast? What's the commonality? Sometimes when we let ourselves feel what we feel, go past the habitual maps, the space around can have its own kind of vibrancy. And the space inside can have its own kind of spaciousness. And what if the finger closest to your thumb, your pointer finger, could join the thumb in being released from the overlay of our habitual maps of, oh, that's just my pointer finger. I know it. And feel space around, the space inside, the space through it. Drawing it through feeling in space, through the sensations that let you know you have it to begin with. Finding its contour. That can be a very highlighted boundary in some ways, and also feel very permeated. All the way to the tip of the pointer finger. And then with that thing that we move around, that we don't really move around, that isn't really a thing, also include the thumb. Actually, there's just no reason to exclude it. Tip of the pointer fingers, tip of the thumbs. And feeling the space in between those tips. What lets you know how wide or how small that space is between your thumb tip and your pointer finger tip. And with such open, amazed curiosity, you can muster it, gently bringing your pointer finger and thumb closer. Ever so slightly. And just feel the space becoming smaller and smaller. The slowest, imperceptible movement. Until you feel yourself getting closer and closer. see what it's like to anticipate that sense of when they might actually meet and touch, and the sensation of that touch. And what might it be like to feel the circles made with thumb and pointer finger and the space inside those circles? Drawn from the inside out, where we let our sensory experience fully bubble up. And if it feels comfortable for you, continuing in this classic hand mudra that we don't have to have any associations with other than this inside out drawing of our own immediate experience, less filtered by our preconceived maps. And now feeling the other three fingers slightly elongate and slightly spread. Letting yourself feel them to their very fingertips. The space around them. The space that each one takes up. The highlighted yet permeated boundaries, outline of those fingers. And one of the techniques that helps artists draw what they see rather than what they think they see is that they draw the negative spaces. So our mind so easily snaps back into maps and labels that can be a little more cartoonish rather than fully rich. Well, it's all relative. More fully rich. That even if I'm, drawing my pinky finger, and I'm thinking I'm drawing that pinky finger, it'll be a little harder for me just to see what I see, the contours, the shapes, the shades. But if I draw the space around my finger, well, I don't have preconceptions about the space around something. It's not a thing. Let's play with that a little bit here. Actually feeling the space between your pinky and your fourth finger. Though I use the labels to indicate that, what's it like if you were drawing, feeling the space between? And then feeling into the space between the fourth finger and the middle finger. Tracing that negative space. And then drawing, so to speak, the inside circle made by your thumb and pointer finger, but you're not thinking about thumb and pointer finger, just that inside space. And what would it be like to take in the kind of gestalt of the entire space around the hands, like a mold you feel around the entirety of the hands and fingers? And putting a little bit of space in between the pointer finger and the thumb. And draw the negative space between the two. And notice what you feel in that space. Gradually making it wider and wider again. Until you let your fingers of your hands each spread a little bit in their own direction. And draw all at once the negative spaces between all the fingers. You see it through your feeling. You perceive it. And then let the hands soften and rest in the lap. And does it even do justice to that experience to call them hands? Hands and air and space and stuff. What is your experience? You're welcome to stay seated however you might be. Or sometimes at this stage of practice, I find that just laying down signals that this is not about a trying. We lay down our body to support. And perhaps with it we can lay down some of our other attitudes about what we might or might not be about here. Seeing if your hands, just even with a little bit of movement, adjusting, when to kind of snap back to just those, those objects at the end of my arms that I move about, and they let me do what I want to do. And now with this kind of a practice, you do have a memory of a felt experience that can be helpful. Perhaps you've experienced something like this many times before. Each time we experience it, there can be this greater ease in accessing it again. So it can see what you might, quote unquote, do to let go of some of the maps that tend to block out our fuller, richer experience. So if the Feynman exercise worked for you, maybe that's what you do. If you liked feeling the negative spaces and feeling like, oh, what would it be for me to actually draw from the inside out? What lets me know I have these hands and fingers? Or now that you may have this sense of this direction of this practice, can come up with your own that works well for you. And seeing what it's like to get back in touch with that feeling of, oh, I just have to say it, hands, we gotta use the labels. That also feel so much more than what we can habitually assume them to be. Sometimes I feel like something like this is a way of, I don't know, we used to have like these things that you could scratch. I don't even know what they're called, but you can scratch off a layer and then there's maybe a little prize or a little message underneath. And so we kind of scratch off one layer of this habitual conceptual map. And we feel just even our hands, just this one part of us. How there's a richness underneath, a peeling back. And even if the rest of our body experience is still more covered over, we can, in a way, lead with our reasoning, something I often like to do, just to make it easier to feel. It is easier to feel something when it makes sense. And we're not yet trying to justify why our feeling of our hands could feel maybe this rich. Indescribably so much more than what we tend to assume it to be. But it is reasonable to be like, you know what, my hands are just not that special compared to the rest of my body. Yeah, they're more innervated, there's more nerve endings, all of that. So, but they're not, fundamentally different than the rest of my body. And so just even seeing if that leading with that reason of why not? Why not just feel the rest of your body more like your hands? There's no clear reason why not. Seeing what might follow. Opening to the unknown. That, in this case at least, is not the unknown beyond, but the unknown that's just beneath what we think we know, and can be immediately experientially touched in upon whenever we can peel back a layer of assumptions. If you'd like, can see drawing the entire outline, contour in 3D space of this form, this human form, the space around, the space within. The highlighted, permeated outline between the two. That includes each finger, each wrinkle and ridge on each finger, and everything else. If you would like, and put your hands either on your lower dantian, belly button area, or one at your heart area, one at your dantian area, to you. And then maybe let it be a gesture of openness. What are you, body? Maybe I thought I knew you, but maybe I'm actually just in a process of coming to know even this basic experience of having a body. and resting here for a few minutes. In whatever your experience is in this moment. And can stay resting as long as you have the inclination and the time for it. And just want to say again, a thank you for adventuring, and where my hope for this initial session was that we can maybe see how we do have these maps of the terrain that can limit the fullness of our own experience, and how there can be some, tricks or ways that we can get past some of those labels and assumptions and notice what that can feel like. And what our body can feel like as we peel back some of those conceptual layers of assumptions. And maybe also notice how those kinds of techniques and things like that can definitely reach saturation point and be like, I can't maintain the imagination that I'm an alien beamed into this body anymore. But that this opening to the unknown that actually connects us more to what's beneath that assumptive layer of mapping, which is another map, and we'll get into that. Maps all the way down for us. But this peeling back of some of these more kind of cartoonish conceptual maps to actually feel more the immediacy of our experience, how that can take something like a hand and let us feel it very differently. And that this exploration can help center us in kind of a baseline for when we bring in, so we will next time, some ways that in a way can be like another technique, method, you might say, of reaching for that sense of awe and something beyond our known maps, our usual maps of body and stuff, and saying, well, this is what science says. And so maybe even having a more of a sustained sense of, I can more open to that, because that's the way it really is. And how that can get very complicated, because what science has the authority, we'll enjoy all of that. But where the baseline here is actually coming to see what is at work in our own experience with these conceptual layers, with the peeling back, with this immediacy of our own experience, so that then we have this shared sense of what can be possible even before we touch in on science. So then when we touch in on some science, we can have that orientation within ourselves to really process it for ourselves and come to see what makes sense for us, what truly serves us, and what we might like to continue to explore and practice further. So I'll say till next time, and for now, let's dive into some Q&C. So if you have any comments, questions from the practice today, just bring my little keyboard over. Say hi. Let me see how I can be like this. All right. Swiss R. Hi, David. Hi, Carol. Good to see you. David, thank you so much. Swiss R. Oh, so good to see you. Gratitude right back at you. David says, I've been traveling home in the car for most of this, but it's been fabulous, especially with a perfect clear night sky, and seeing so far into the stars has made me more appreciative of the space around me. David, I'm glad you weren't doing this with eyes closed. Seeing those stars can just bring in that wonder too. JB, good to see you as well. Carol, yes, good to see you. Oh, David says I wasn't driving. Okay. That's good to know. That's very good to know. Let me see if I can pull this so I can see more of you. That's so great. I see that many of you joined at the bottom, looking at your icons here. Hello, Emily. I saw your icon before your post. Hello, Mackenzie. I got on an airplane yesterday and today I'm in your time zone. I'm totally spaced and scattered, but so nice to hear your voice. Travel can definitely do that for us. Welcome to the Eastern time zone. Fun just to practice here together. Would anyone like to try and attempt to put into words what they were feeling in their hands? Or maybe it ought not to be attempted. Andy says, inspired by all this curiosity and adventuring of the mind-body map. We didn't even necessarily talk about some of the meditators' attitude. I know that I can fall into a rut with that of even subtly having some kind of a expectation, familiarity, assumption of what it is I'm going to feel, what I should feel, what others have felt. And really do hope that this is an invitation into your own experience, even though it's something guided. Vervain, once I related to my body as alien, there was a strangeness to my hands. Presence, touch, movement, pressure. Be interesting. Does the strangeness feel unfamiliar but comforting in a way? Sometimes as I practice something like this, it all can feel so unified. The space around me and the spaciousness inside me. And yet it's kind of bursting with each very specific, uncategorizable point of experience. I guess if I was an artist, I would be one of those pointillists or something, where there's a feeling of kind of a uniqueness of each point, and yet a spaciousness through it. Emily says, not fully in my body, but I did check in with it some. Yeah. I think some of the adventure and fun of this too is that and I caught myself with this in the guidance at one point, but it's all relative. So I know, and I know what you mean, Emily. I'm not trying to nitpick about it. It's just that sometimes we tend to think of it as like black and white. I'm in my body or I'm not. I'm aware of my breath or I'm not. And all of that only really makes sense at the cartoon level. But when we get into this kind of layering of all these maps upon maps that never bottom out to the terrain itself, but can approach it, even after our most, mind-blowing, experience-blowing meditation session where we're like, that is it. That's what they're talking about or whatever. It's like, no, it's just another layer of these maps, and there's always more we can open to. And so Master Wancho Park really, and we'll talk lots more about how he approaches this and how I use this for that sense of opening to my own experience. But he calls this opening to your unknown, opening to the unknown. And there's the unknown beyond, there's the unknown beneath, where it's just can be and it doesn't have to be a ripping away. It's just what would it be like to lighten up one layer of our assumptions, and even to have them, not to try and get rid of them. Like they can be there like transparencies, and then you kind of see through them. So we can use them all, but also see through them. David says, I'm not sure if one of my fingers was supposed to light up. Yeah. Well, this is the Christmas tree twinkle lights meditation. So everyone can have their own experience. Sometimes, I think David, you and we've talked about this explosion of sparkles that sometimes can happen. David, since we've been practicing together, I'm far more conscious of that external space, and I feel the air around totally different now. So interesting too, even how we'll get into this with some fun with consciousness, right? Like that air around us, what's around our body is, how is that actually part of our map and part of our experience? Yeah, inside out really begins to blur a lot. Emily, I like that way of seeing it. Like that relative, yeah. We can always torture ourselves with classifications. It's just nice to be on at least I find it, maybe you find it as well too, nice to be on an endless journey. I was once talking about this to someone though, and they're like, what, there's no end? They were very disappointed that there was no end. They didn't like that, but I like it that there's no end. We're vain, more like children before we get jaded and assumed. Exactly. Yep, that can be another one. It can be just feeling like you can be a child again or go be with some young kids. Go, even look at those babies in the strollers and how they're taking in their toes. They are meditation masters taking in their toes in the spirit of this. David says, we studied negative space, etc. at art college, but I've never truly been so aware of living inside it or outside it. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we just use a trick or a method to try and peel a layer away, but the main thing is that, well, I'll just save it for some future sessions. So my thanks to y'all for joining and practicing here. And if this was a fun adventure, hope to see you at our next session as we continue to open beyond some of our assumptions. Emily says, I like the liminal spaces. Yeah. Andy, super fun. Super fun. I should bring my Super Kid Tai Chi t-shirt out. Yeah, super fun. Thank you all. All right. Take care all. Bye.